Hi, my name is Morel. I wish I could tell you this is just another sad family story, the kind you hear about, but never think could happen to you. But this one was mine. I found out my parents left everything, every brick, every dollar, every keepsake to my sister. And to me, they left $1. One single hollow symbolic dollar. No explanation. No apology. Just a line in a legal document that erased me from their lives as if I had never existed. But the truth is, the number didn't cut me as deep as the betrayal did. Because this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was planned carefully, deliberately. And for years, while I was busy paying their bills, driving them to doctor's appointments, caring for my dying father, and repairing a house that I thought one day would be mine to pass down, they already knew it wasn't. They had promised it to someone else. And then when my father passed, they held a funeral. A funeral I wasn't even invited to. My name wasn't in the obituary. My face wasn't at the service. My existence gone. And when I dared to ask why, the answer I got was the kind of cruelty that only family can deliver, because you're strong. You don't need anything. But here's the question that has haunted me since. What do you do when the people who raised you, the ones who should have loved you most, decide to rewrite the story of your life and leave you out completely? I'll tell you what I did. It started with an envelope. I hadn't meant to open it. It was buried in a pile of medical bills and insurance summaries left over from Moran's latest surgery. I'd stopped by after work like I always did to help sort through her paperwork. She never asked me to, but she never thanked me either. That was just the rhythm of our relationship, me giving her, taking no acknowledgement in between. Page after page, billing codes. Medicare forms, insurance statements blurred together until my fingers landed on an envelope that felt heavier than the rest. Stamped in bold black ink, estate plan updated. I hesitated. Not because I thought it wasn't my place, but because I already knew deep down that it was. After everything I had sacrificed for that household, after every grocery run, every midnight emergency, every mortgage payment I slipped into without a word, I told myself that if anyone had earned the right to know how this family's story ended, it was me. So I opened it. 10 seconds. That's how long it took for the words to settle into my brain. My body didn't react right away. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't stutter. That came later, when the weight of those sentences finally sank into me like lead. Everything, absolutely everything, was left to my sister Octavia. The house, the land, the accounts that covered Moran's healthcare, my father's personal effects, the safe deposit box, even the dog's trust fund, and me. To my youngest daughter, Muriel Dawson, I leave the sum of $1 symbolically. That was it. One line. One cruel punchline disguised as love, disguised as closure. I sat there with the paper in my hands, but it didn't feel like paper anymore. It felt like it had absorbed every grocery bag I carried up their steps, every long night I sat by my father's bedside, every hour of work I put in just to keep them afloat. And now all of it had been twisted, rewritten, and handed back to me as a single dollar. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I didn't even call Evelyn, though I knew she would have told me to breathe, to wait, to find the right words. But there were no words, only questions that gnawed at me. How long had they planned this? Had they laughed about it? Had they ever said my name when they were deciding my fate? Did they even see me anymore? Or had I already been erased from their story long before the ink dried on that document? The next morning, I drove back to the house, the will clenched in my hand like proof of a crime. Moran was in the living room, her feet propped up, thumbing through a shopping catalog, her face calm, almost careless. I stood in front of her, my chest hollow, my voice stripped of anger, because anger felt too small for what I carried. I found the estate packet, I said. She looked up, blinked once slowly, and set the magazine aside. "Oh," she said. And then, with a voice as flat as the ink on that paper, I figured you would. And in that moment, I realized she had always known. No apology. No hint of shame. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't leave space for answers, only for wounds. Why, I finally asked the words, scraping out of my throat like it had claws. "Why would you cut me out?" "Why would Dad?" She didn't flinch. She didn't even take a moment to think. Instead, she waved her hand through the air like brushing away a fly. Sweetheart, Octavia needs more. You're doing just fine on your own. The phrase landed harder than the will itself. You're doing just fine. As if my independence was a reason to punish me. As if the fact that I survived without help meant I didn't deserve love, security, or even acknowledgement. You've always been stronger, she added softly, almost like it was a compliment. You've never needed help. You've made it on your own. We thought you'd understand. Understand. The word rang in my ears like a bell I couldn't unhear. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, not because I lacked words, but because every word that wanted to come out was jagged with fury. How could I explain without screaming? How could I make her see the truth when she had already chosen not to understand? Understand that I paid their mortgage while Octavia posted spa day photos. Understand that I worked double shifts so the lights wouldn't be shut off while Octavia clinked champagne glasses on her vacations. Understand that I scrubbed the floors after Moran's chemo treatments while Octavia uploaded beach selfies captioned, "Blessed beyond measure." Understand that I gave up pieces of my life to hold theirs together only to be rewarded with a single symbolic dollar. Instead of screaming, I folded the will with careful, deliberate slowness and placed it on the coffee table between us. I see, I said. She gave me that soft, infuriating smile. The kind people use when they think they've done you a favor you don't deserve. Try not to take it personally, honey. I didn't answer. My silence was my last dignity. So I stood. No yelling, no slammed doors, just the muted sound of my shoes against the tile and the metallic jingle of my car keys in my hand. Later that evening, I found myself parked in front of my father's old house, the house he built with his own hands, brick by brick, sweat dripping into the foundation. The house I had grown up in. The house he once promised would always have a place for me. The porch light was still on. The yard was still trimmed. The windows still glowed faintly with the flicker of a television. Everything looked the same except it wasn't. It felt hollow. Like the memories had packed up and left without me abandoning the walls they were supposed to haunt. I stayed in the car engine off staring at the house I used to call home. My breath fogged the window as I whispered the truth out loud for the first time just to hear it echo back at me. I buried both my parents. One with tears, one with silence. And somehow I still wasn't invited to my own grief. I didn't cry. Not then. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull heavy, the kind that settles deep in the gut like a stone you can't spit out. The kind that doesn't cut it corrodes. I didn't go inside. I just sat there listening to the old porch creak in the wind, the same sound I used to hear as a child when Dad came home late from the shop. I stayed until the TV light flickered off, then eased my car from the curb. Slow, quiet, like leaving the scene of a robbery. Only this time, I was the one robbed of history, of belonging, of a place in my own bloodline. That night, I tossed and turned until sunlight sliced through the blinds like an interrogation lamp. My body begged for rest, but my mind replayed everything on loop. By 9 a.m., I gave up. I made myself a cup of coffee so weak it tasted like water stained with bitterness. I sat at the kitchen counter staring at my phone. Notifications, missed calls from Evelyn. A new text from Octavia. 6 words. Don't make this more than it is. No greeting. No explanation. Just cold dismissal like always. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over a dozen replies I could have sent. Words that could have cut, could have burned, could have shattered. Instead, I set the phone down. Pressed my palms hard against the edge of the counter until the wood grain etched itself into my skin. It wasn't the message that stung. It was how unsurprising it was. Because that was Octavia's gift, her ability to twist reality until I was always the problem. Until my pain was just an overreaction. Until the betrayal itself became invisible and I was left defending myself against shadows. And standing there in my kitchen with bitterness clinging to the air, stronger than the scent of coffee, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't written out of their story. Maybe I had outgrown it. It wasn't just what she said. It was how I was expected to feel about it. That had always been her superpower since we were teenagers, this uncanny mix of selective memory and an unshakable moral high ground. She could rewrite history in her favor, and then stand tall on the fiction daring me to question it. I carried my coffee to the table, sat down, opened my laptop, pretended to check work files. But my fingers betrayed me. They drifted back to the phone, to the itch I couldn't ignore. One tap, and I was on her social media page. She had never blocked me. Of course not. Blocking me would have meant cutting off her audience, and Octavia always needed an audience. She liked me to see, liked me to witness the version of herself she curated for the world, the glossy, flawless one. Her newest post was from last week, her birthday, a photo album titled Still Becoming. I shouldn't have scrolled. I knew better. But I did. Image after image slid across my screen, candlelit smiles, expensive dinners, glasses raised in delicate hands. And then one photo stopped me cold. Octavia, radiant in a silk blouse, a glass of wine poised delicately in one hand, her other hand resting under her chin. Fingers curled just enough to catch the light. And there it was. The ring. Grandma Elaine's ring. The same ring she had promised to me the summer I turned 10. The ring she'd slipped onto my little finger, too big to stay on, laughing softly as she said, "One day, baby. It skips a generation. And your fingers, they're just like hers." I hadn't thought of that day in years, but the memory came back in full color. The warm sunlight on the porch, the smell of lemonade, the feeling of her cool, wrinkled hands wrapping around mine. And now there it was, on Octavia's hand. The caption beneath the photo read, "She always wanted me to have this. Feels like home again." I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I didn't hurl the phone against the wall like my body begged me to. I just sat there, stone still, as confirmation carved itself into me. That ring didn't belong to her. But then again, what did belong mean in this family anymore? I stood, slowly walked to the drawer near the fridge and pulled out an envelope. Evelyn's handwriting scrawled across the front, Charlton's will, original copy. I had never opened it. Not once. I placed it flat on the kitchen table, the paper catching the morning light like it was glowing a line in the sand, a boundary, a turning point. Then I picked up my phone again. This time I didn't hesitate. I called Octavia, straight to voicemail. So I typed instead. Each word deliberate, heavy, carved in stone. "You know that ring was meant for me. Just like the house. Just like everything you've taken. Send." 5 minutes later, my phone rang. My heart jumped, but it wasn't her. It was Moran. Her name lit up the screen once, then twice. I ignored it. On the third try, I answered. Her voice was firm, but wrapped in that thin veneer of false concern I knew too well. The same voice she used when she explained why Octavia needed a private college while I should be fine with community. The same voice she used when she told me my father was too tired to attend my first piano recital. "Muriel," she said, using my name like it was still tender between us. "Look, I know this is hard. But your father wanted peace in the family. If you keep pushing this, you're going to be the one tearing us apart." For a moment, I almost laughed. Peace. What kind of peace is built on erasure? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't even tremble. I just said steady and sharp. "No, I'm just refusing to stay erased." Silence. A pause long enough for me to know my words had landed like a stone. Then came her sigh, tired, annoyed, dismissive. "You've always been so difficult, so rigid." "I've been consistent," I replied. "You're just not used to me saying no." Click. The line went dead. I sat there a long while, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only witness to what had just happened. The sun had climbed higher, spilling across the kitchen table, hitting the edge of the will envelope until it glinted like something alive. I didn't know exactly what came next. A lawyer, a confrontation, a war. But I knew one thing with certainty: they wanted me quiet. They wanted me grateful for scraps. They wanted me small, compliant, invisible. But if silence was what they wanted, then they chose the wrong daughter. So I sat there, letting the quiet settle around me like dust. No TV, no music, No book to numb the ache. Just me, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, and the echo of my own heartbeat. And somewhere in that heavy stillness, a memory pushed its way forward. Not a grand scene, not a big moment. Just a single line of text buried deep, waiting for me to remember. It was from 6 months ago. A random Tuesday, I think the kind of day you never remember until it changes you. I had just stepped out of the post office, juggling a stack of envelopes and a coffee gone cold in my other hand, when my phone buzzed. A message from a name I hadn't seen in years. Lacey. A girl I'd sat next to in high school English, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Her text was short, casual, in a way only someone distant can be. "So sorry about your dad. I just saw the obituary." I stopped walking. The world around me blurred, cars, passing people rushing by, all muffled like I was underwater. My eyes clung to the screen. Obituary, I reread it. Once. Twice. Again. It didn't change. The words were still there. I hadn't gotten a call. Not from Maren. Not from Octavia. Not even Evelyn, who always tried at least to soften the blows. My father, Charlton Dawson, had died. And no one had told me. Not a whisper. Not a voicemail. Not even a forwarded link from a distant cousin. That night, alone in my apartment, I found it online. The obituary was buried beneath a pile of banner ads and sponsored posts like my father's life had to compete with car sales and discount mattresses. It was short, polite, scrubbed of anything human. It mentioned his love for woodworking, his quiet sense of humor, and his beloved daughter Octavia. Nothing else. No mention of me. Not in the body, not in the list of survivors, not even in the condolences. I hadn't missed his funeral. I hadn't overlooked an invitation. I had been deliberately excluded. The next day, I called Evelyn. My voice cracked as I said the words I just found out. The silence on the other end was so heavy, it felt like it filled the room, coating my lungs, making it hard to breathe. "Finally," she said softly, "I thought you knew. I only found out after the service. They handled everything on their own." Of course they did. A week later, it hit me all over again. Octavia's slideshow on Facebook, celebrating a life well lived. That was the caption beneath a carousel of photos: Octavia and Dad at holiday dinners. Octavia and Dad smiling at the beach. Octavia and Dad standing in front of that old red truck he swore he'd restore one day. Every frame was curated, polished, perfect. And not a single photo contained me. Not even a blurry elbow at the edge of the frame, not even my shadow in the corner. It was as if I had never been there. The silence they gave me wasn't a mistake. It wasn't oversight. It was strategy. 2 weeks later, I drove down to see Evelyn. She lived in the same brick colonial she'd always had, nestled behind 2 sycamore trees that bent a little too far into the street. She greeted me with tired eyes and a long hug, the kind of hug that didn't really comfort but carried the weight of regret. Inside, we sat at her kitchen table. Same checkered tablecloth, same chipped sugar jar I remembered from childhood visits. "I kept this," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was the printed obituary Octavia had mailed out to the extended family. Then another, the formal announcement she had sent to community leaders. Old neighbors, Dad's union friends. I didn't need to read them line by line. I only needed to scan the white space. There it was. Octavia listed as his only child. The words cut sharper than I expected. My fingers curled around the edge of the paper, my stomach twisting. Not from shock had passed. What filled me now was something heavier. Recognition. This wasn't rejection. This was deletion. "They didn't want anyone asking questions," Evelyn said quietly. "So they wrote you out entirely." I couldn't respond. I was afraid if I opened my mouth, something rawer than words would come out. She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "He wouldn't have wanted this. He loved you." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But love undocumented is fragile. Love without proof is easy to erase. Later that night, back at my apartment, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. In one hand, I held the obituary. In the other, my birth certificate. Both pieces of paper bore his name, Charlton Dawson, father, and yet one of them meant nothing compared to the other. The obituary carried more power than my own blood. With a single omission, it rewrote my existence. I stared at my reflection, the papers trembling in my grip, and whispered into the silence. They buried him. Then they buried me. But I'm still here. I left the bathroom light on its glow, spilling faintly down the hall like a witness to what I'd just whispered to the mirror. My legs carried me to the living room, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, half buried with my father, half clawing for air. At my desk, I opened my laptop and created a new folder on the desktop. The name came to me in one breath, steady and deliberate: Restoration Plan, Charlton Dawson's Legacy. Piece by piece, I began to fill it. The scanned obituary with its clinical lies. The funeral invite I never received. Screenshots of Octavia's curated slideshow, every frame designed to erase me. And my birth certificate, that single line of ink tying me to him more truthfully than all their public performances combined. I didn't cry. Not a single tear. My eyes burned, but nothing fell. I didn't rage either. No slammed fists, no broken glasses. Instead, I felt a quiet steadiness, like I was building an archive proof of a life they wanted scrubbed clean. I was collecting receipts. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. My apartment was still wrapped in shadows, but I couldn't stay still. I needed movement answers, something concrete. I left early, drove through streets still blurred by morning fog. The sky hadn't decided if it wanted to be gray or blue heavy or light. It mirrored me, indecisive but restless. Evelyn's office sat on the second floor of an old building on Bay Street, wedged between a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and an antique shop whose windows displayed clocks that never seemed to work. No grand sign, no polished brass plate. Just her name on a fading door, E. Grant, attorney at law. You had to know she was there to find her, just like how I had to fight to find the pieces of my own story. She buzzed me in without hesitation, her face calm, almost expectant. Like she'd known this day was coming. Did my father ever leave you anything for me? I asked before my coat even slid from my shoulders. A letter, a document, anything. Evelyn's mouth pressed into a straight line. Silence stretched long enough for me to hear the hum of the old radiator in the corner. Then she stood, disappeared into the back room, and returned with a manila envelope. It was aged edges worn soft, the flap sealed tight. My father's handwriting scrawled across the front: Charlton Dawson. Bold, precise, always in capital letters. He asked me to hold this, Evelyn said quietly, setting it between us. Told me not to file it unless something felt wrong after he was gone. My breath caught. I reached out slowly, afraid it might disintegrate if I grabbed it too quickly. When my fingers brushed the paper, it was warm from her hand, but it felt like stone in mine. Heavy. Unyielding. I slid it closer, broke the seal, and unfolded the pages inside. The ink was dark, the notary stamp crisp. A will dated 2 years before his death. I, Charlton Ray Dawson, being of sound mind and body, leave all real and liquid assets, including but not limited to my home savings investments and personal belongings, to my daughter Morel Dawson, my only child by blood. My chest didn't swell in triumph. My hands didn't tremble in disbelief. The sensation was deeper, quieter. It wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was confirmation. The truth laid bare, black on white. He knew, I whispered. Evelyn nodded. He did. He saw how things were shifting. How Morin was controlling the mail, managing his prescriptions, filtering his phone calls. He wanted this to be a backup plan, not a battlefield. Well, I said, folding the paper carefully, sliding it back into the envelope, it's both now. I tucked it into my bag, left her office, and walked to my car parked along the street. But I didn't drive. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the windshield as rain began to mist against the glass. Not a storm, not a downpour, just light, indecisive drops. The kind that blur everything without washing anything away. I thought back to the envelope Morin had so casually allowed me to find, the one that left Octavia with everything, and me with a symbolic $1. an insult disguised as legal fairness. But now I had something more than memories and scraps. I had leverage. That evening I didn't post a thing, but Octavia did. A new photo lit up her page, sharp, bright, perfectly filtered. She was standing in front of Dad's house. My house. The one that on paper belonged to me alone. Above her head hung a banner, the Charlton Legacy Fund serving our community with honor. The caption was worse. Dad would be proud of what we're building here. His memory lives on in how we give back. The comments came fast, glowing, and generous. Aunt Jo, you've always been the heart of this family, sweetie. A church friend. You're honoring him beautifully. A neighbor from years ago. He raised a strong woman. Each one felt like a match dragged across my skin, slow, stinging, deliberate. Then came the comment that split something inside me wide open. People forget who helped when it wasn't convenient. They show up when there's money. Sad. It didn't mention my name. It didn't have to. I stared at the screen until the words bled into each other, then shut the app and opened my laptop. Inside the folder labeled Restoration Plan Charlton Dawson's Legacy, I created a new subfolder, Legal Evidence. The fight had already begun. I scanned the will Evelyn had given me, making sure every corner, every notary stamp, every line of ink was captured in crisp detail. I saved it into the folder I'd already started labeling it with the date, attaching the notary seal in its rightful place. My hands moved without hesitation, as if they already knew what came next. I opened my browser, the glow of the screen spilling across my desk, and drafted a message to a probate lawyer in Atlanta. Not just any lawyer, this was someone Evelyn had once mentioned back when Morin first began shifting power of attorney around like it was a deck of cards she owned. A name Evelyn had whispered almost like a warning. Subject line urgent. Disputed Will Charlton Dawson estate. The body of the email was sharp, pared down precise. I have possession of a notarized will signed by my father, leaving all assets to me. The current estate is being managed under a conflicting document. I'm requesting a consultation to review validity and next steps. I attached the scans, the will, the signature, the seal, and pressed send. No drafts. No hesitation. Just a clean strike. As the sun dipped low outside my window, streaks of gold stretched across the hardwood floor as if my apartment itself was quietly approving the move. I pulled out my journal, the one place I allowed my thoughts to breathe raw and unfiltered, and wrote in ink that bit into the page. You're loud when you have something to hide. I've always been quiet, but now I have receipts. I paused, tapped the pen against the margin, then added, I don't need revenge. Not yet. I just need to make sure that when the time comes, the truth has its own lawyer. I closed the journal, but my body wouldn't settle. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building felt amplified, every hum of the fridge like static under my skin. My mind replayed the words, the documents, the handwriting. The truth sat in me like a stone too heavy to swallow, too sharp to ignore. By morning, I was already on the road back to Evelyn's office. The air was gray unsettled, a kind of heavy spring morning where the sky hadn't yet chosen whether to weep or brighten. I didn't care. I wasn't there for the weather. When I walked in, Evelyn motioned for me to sit before I could even ask a question. She didn't waste words. She slid a folder across her desk, the scrape of cardboard against wood louder than it should have been. My stomach tightened. I opened it slowly, half expecting more scattered notes, half afraid of what might be inside. But the moment my eyes landed on the first page, my breath stalled. It was a power of attorney, dated 3 months before my father died, signed allegedly by Charlton R. Dawson. I leaned closer, my eyes narrowing at the signature at the bottom. It wasn't him. My father's handwriting had always been the same, blocky, angled, slightly to the left. Every letter stubbornly separate, like even in ink he refused to lean on anyone else. But this was looped too neat, the kind of flourish someone adds when they're trying to look authentic. It was a forgery dressed up as care. Evelyn didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into her drawer and pulled out a birthday card my father had sent her years ago. I didn't need to compare for long. I'd grown up watching him scribble notes on the corners of bills, writing reminders on envelopes taped to the fridge. His pen always pressed hard, leaving grooves on the paper beneath. This smooth, almost delicate scrawl. It wasn't him. This isn't him, I said flatly. Evelyn's mouth tightened. I thought you'd see it too. I looked up the folder still open in front of me. This is what she used to get access to the bank, isn't it? Evelyn nodded. And control of the estate. My jaw clenched. I closed the folder with a sharp snap, then exhaled through my nose. She forged his name. She forged his name. Yes, Evelyn said quietly. And no one questioned it. Because why would they? She had the house. She had the paperwork. She had access. By the time anyone might have looked closer, the damage was already done. Not anymore, I said, sliding the folder back across her desk. My voice was steady, but beneath it ran a current of steel I hadn't felt in years. Later that afternoon, I drove out to the house, my house legally, though no one seemed to acknowledge it. I parked a block away out of sight and walked the long stretch to the back door. The siding looked a little more weathered than I remembered the windows still framed by the curtains Octavia had picked out years ago, smug in their permanence. I crouched beside the row of potted plants, my fingers brushing soil. Mean had always hidden the spare key beneath the second pot. I didn't know if she'd been careless enough to leave it there all this time, but habit has a way of betraying people. I lifted the pot brushed dirt from my hands, and there it was. Cold metal waiting. I didn't come to steal. I didn't come to touch anything of theirs. I came for one thing, a box. The attic was exactly as I remembered, thick with dust filled with the ghosts of holidays packed away in brittle cardboard. Old wreaths tangled strings of lights furniture wrapped in yellowing sheets. I moved slowly, deliberately, until my eyes caught at a storage bin labeled in my father's handwriting. Tools, yard shed. I remembered it. Not the contents, but the way his letters pressed deep into the label, like he wanted to make sure it could never fade. And in that moment, standing in the attic of the house they'd tried to rewrite out from under me, I realized this wasn't just about a box. This was about proof. About reclaiming the evidence they thought would never be found. But I also remembered what he used to tuck away in those bins, little secrets that didn't belong to anyone but him. Letters, cards, scraps of paper he didn't want Maren rifling through when she was on one of her cleaning frenzies. That was his way. Careful, private, deliberate. I dug through layers of tools rags, stiff with time, and cracked plastic containers until my fingers brushed something solid at the bottom. A cigar box. Old, weather-worn, still carrying the faintest trace of tobacco, even though it hadn't held cigars in years. My breath caught as I lifted it out, my pulse thudding in my ears. Inside, beneath a few folded receipts and a rusted key, there was an envelope. No stamp. No postmark. Just my name written in his unmistakable handwriting across the front. Blocky. Steady. Honest. The sight of it nearly undid me. My hands shook when I picked it up, not from rage, not from grief, but from the sheer weight of something real after weeks of lies and paper ghosts. This was his ink. His intent. His voice pressed into the page. I broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the letter. The writing was uneven, a little shakier than I remembered, but still his. Merle, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I didn't get the chance to say this out loud. I know what they're doing. I may not be able to stop it, but I need you to know it was never my wish. You are my legacy. You've always been the one who showed up. I see you. That was it. Short, simple, but more than enough. I read it once, twice, 3 times, my lips moving silently over each word as though saying them could call him back. Then I folded the paper with care, slid it into my bag, and pressed my hand against it like I could anchor it to me. On the way out, I locked the back door and returned the key to the same pot of dirt where I'd found it. No trace left behind. Back home, I sat at my desk, the letter still humming in my chest like a second heartbeat. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned off, leaving only clarity. I opened my laptop and drafted an email. Formal, short, no flourish, subject formal probate challenge estate of Charlton Dawson. To Savannah County, probate clerk C.C. Morin Kellis, Octavia Lorne Attachments. Charlton's original notarized will. Side-by-side comparison of authentic and forged signatures. A scanned copy of the letter he'd written me. The body of the email was one line cold and sharp as glass. This is your chance to do what's right before a judge makes it official. No hashtags, no public outcry, no messy online spectacle. Just the law. I hit send, shut my laptop, and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel buried. I felt unearthed. The next morning, I woke to an alert from my bank app. Still half asleep, I thought it was just another routine statement. But something about the tone of the notification made me sit up straighter. Final. That was the word that came to mind. I tapped it open. Available balance 42 to 73. I blinked, refreshed the page. Blinked again. Not just low, not just drained, gutted. The joint account, the one I had opened with Dad during his first round of chemo, the one we'd used for hospital copays pharmacy, runs roof repairs after storms, was empty. The transaction log told me everything I needed to know. $38.126, $19 withdrawn. 8:32 a.m. Location, Savannah, GA, branch downtown Riverbank. I didn't need a name. The signature was already written in my bones. Still wearing pajama pants and yesterday's t-shirt, I dialed the customer service number and waited through the endless music loop. When the representative finally answered, her tone was flat scripted, already tired of me. She had financial authority on the account, the woman said briskly. Power of attorney. Her words landed like a rubber stamp, cold and mechanical, as if theft became legitimate the moment it was wrapped in policy. I gripped the phone tighter. Yeah. Well, that power ended the moment she buried the man who gave it to her. Before the representative could respond, I hung up. Silence settled around me. Heavy. Thick. The weight of what had just happened didn't crash like a wave. It settled like dust after a building collapse, creeping into the air, coating every surface. This was Moren's response. Not an argument. Not a denial. Not even the courtesy of pretense. She'd skipped past words and gone straight for my wallet. And what stung most wasn't the number. It wasn't even the theft. It was how efficient it was. Clean. Clinical. Not cruel, not personal. Just business. I stood slowly, the edges of the world sharp against me. I got dressed, threw on a jacket, slid my father's letter into my bag, and grabbed my tote. Then I walked out the door, my destination already certain. Straight to Evelyn's. We sat across from each other, 2 cups of coffee cooling untouched between us, their steam curling faintly and vanishing into the heavy silence. Neither of us cared about the taste. Evelyn leaned back, watching me carefully, then stood and pulled a thick binder from her bookshelf. The sound of it sliding free echoed in the quiet, heavy with meaning. I figured you'd come, she said softly, her voice carrying that mixture of inevitability and sadness that only comes when truth can no longer be avoided. I was going to call you later this week. She placed the binder on the table and flipped it open with deliberate care. From between its plastic sleeves, she slid out a trifold funeral program, the kind handed out at services, glossy paper with laminated photos and neatly printed verses. My throat tightened the moment I saw it. On the cover was my father. Not the frail version I had known in his final months, but younger, stronger, maybe 10 years ago, wearing his old Braves cap. His eyes lit with laughter, his mouth curled into the grin he always wore right after delivering one of his corny jokes. For a split second, I could almost hear his voice again, teasing alive. But then I opened it. Inside were the familiar pieces, scripture passages, acknowledgments, names. My eyes scanned quickly, my pulse quickening with each line. And then I flipped to the back page and froze. Octavia Lorne, beloved daughter. Moren Kellis, loyal, devoted daughter. Gordon Traz, lifelong companion. Honored family friend. That was it. No survived by. No mention of me. Not a single line, not even a passing note. As if I had never drawn breath in his house, never held his hand in the hospital, never existed at all. The paper blurred as I stared at it, my heart pounding like it wanted to tear through my chest. They hadn't just left me out, they had erased me, rewritten the story, buried me alongside him without the courtesy of a grave. The funeral hadn't been a farewell. It had been a performance, and they had cast themselves as the only players who mattered. Evelyn let out a long, careful breath, her eyes heavy. "This went out everywhere," she said quietly. "Every local church, the newspaper, your father's veterans group. It's the record now." My voice scraped when I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Did anyone question it?" She gave the smallest shrug, lips pressed into a thin line. "Maybe. But who are they going to ask?" The version in print is the version most people will believe. I folded the program with shaking hands, each crease cutting sharper than the last, and slipped it into my bag like evidence. Then I stood. The ache in my chest hadn't dulled, but my mind had already leapt ahead. This wasn't about vengeance. Not anymore. This was about exposure. About truth. That night back at my desk, I didn't hesitate. My laptop screen glowed in the dark room as I composed a new email not to the family this time, but to the court. Subject: funeral program supporting evidence of will fraud to Savannah County. Probate clerk: C.C. Moran Kellis, Octavia, Lorne Attachments. The scanned funeral program. Charlton's original notarized will, my birth certificate, the forged power of attorney, and most importantly, the letter my father had written to me in his own hand. The body of the email was brief but unflinching. "This version of the story omits the truth. I'm here to correct the record." Before closing the laptop, I did one more thing. I forwarded the same program to a local journalist, Sandra Tillman. She and I had worked together at a tax seminar a few years back. Sharp as a blade when it came to ethics, relentless when she caught the scent of a cover-up. My message to her was only one line. "They removed my name from my father's obituary. Want to know why?" No online posts, no dramatic announcement, no social media fireworks. I didn't need spectacle. The fuse was already lit. And when the fire came, it wouldn't roar. It wouldn't scream. It would burn slow, steady, and undeniable. By Saturday morning, the first ripple had already begun to spread. I sat at the table, my second cup of coffee cooling in my hands when my phone buzzed. A message from a friend. No subject line, just 4 words. "You seeing this?" I clicked the link. It was a photo, posted by Octavia herself. She was standing in the center of the downtown botanical hall, framed like a queen in the spotlight. On one side, Maren. On the other, Gordon Traz, their smiles too wide, too polished, as though nothing in the world could touch them. The stage had been set, and the war for the truth had just gone public. Behind them, stretched high and gleaming under the artificial lights, was a banner so pristine it almost glared, "The Charlton Legacy Fund Preserving Family Values." The words felt like acid on my tongue. Beneath the banner, Octavia had added a caption in the post polished to perfection, the kind of carefully engineered prose that sounded rehearsed because it was, "In honor of our beloved father who taught us the meaning of generosity and grace." Grace. Generosity. Words she had never lived yet wielded like armor. She stood radiant, flawless in her presentation, every hair smoothed into place, every gesture practiced. She didn't just look polished. She looked honed, like someone who had spent years sanding down the rough edges of her lies until they gleamed enough to be mistaken for truth. The comments poured in like a tidal wave, each one a knife. "Your dad would be so proud of the work you're doing. This is exactly what his legacy should be about. She was always the one who cared." You can see it. Each line scrolled past my screen as I sat at my kitchen table, staring down at my phone with a hollow chest. It was like watching my life through glass, except the version on display wasn't mine. It was the story they had scrubbed, sanitized, rewritten until I was nothing but a ghost, an inconvenient shadow they'd erased from the family portrait. And the cruelest part. They were standing in my father's house, the house I'd painted, repaired, kept running when he was too weak to lift a hammer. The house where I'd made soup in the middle of the night, changed the sheets after Chemo sat awake counting his breaths. That same house now staged as a backdrop for their photo ops. It wasn't just theft of money. It wasn't even just theft of property. It was theft of memory. Theft of the man himself. I leaned back in my chair, letting the image settle deep burning. Not the photo, but the intent behind it. This wasn't just a fundraiser. This was a rewrite. They weren't content with stealing what wasn't theirs. They were laundering reputation, laundering history, and I wasn't going to let them. By noon, I had everything I needed. I opened the IRS nonprofit fraud portal and filled out the submission, my hands steady, even as my chest felt like stone. Attached screenshots of Octavia's post, the public registration of their shiny new foundation, proof that the seed money came not from generosity, but from theft. The drained joint account, the wire transfer Moran had signed just days after the funeral. Every document clipped neatly, every fact undeniable. Then a second email. This one to Sandra. They're laundering reputation, not money. Thought you should know. Short. Clean. I knew Sandra. She wouldn't run blind. She would triple-check, sniff around, follow the trail until there was nothing left to hide. That was all I needed, the match. She'd bring the fire. By Sunday night, the tide began to turn. The once gushing comment section had shifted small ripples first. Wait, wasn't there? Another daughter, I thought Muriel was the one who took care of him before he passed. Why wasn't she at the dedication and then sharper? Didn't she cut her own sister out of the funeral? Isn't this the house she stole? How do you honor someone by erasing their family? I didn't reply. I didn't click, didn't engage. I just watched. Quiet as I'd always been, but this time the silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Then Monday morning came. The voicemail blinked on my phone before I'd even poured my coffee. Octavia's voice filled the room tight and brittle, trying to hold composure but cracking under the weight of panic. "You're not going to win this," she snapped. "You think people care about paperwork? About some scanned letter from Dad's junk drawer? No one cared when he was alive. What makes you think they'll care now?" There was a pause. I could almost hear her swallow, hear the venom gather before she delivered the final blow. "He didn't want you. He never did." Click. The message ended without so much as a goodbye. I stared at the phone for a long time, the words lingering like smoke, but they didn't sear me the way she wanted them to. Instead, they settled into a hard, steady calm. I didn't call her back. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I printed a fresh copy of Dad's original will, slid it neatly into a white envelope. On a yellow sticky note, I wrote carefully, "And without anger, your memory of him is manufactured. Mine is filed with the county clerk." I clipped it to the envelope, tucked it under my arm, and drove to her office. The war wasn't in whispers anymore. It was ink on paper, and this time, the record was on my side. Octavia had been renting a tiny shared workspace off Bull Street ever since her so-called consulting business had begun an address more for appearances than necessity, a place with glass doors and white walls designed to look legitimate. I stood in the hallway, envelope in hand, the carpet worn thin beneath my shoes. For a moment, I stared at her nameplate, imagining her on the other side of that door, rehearsing her lies into the reflection of her laptop screen. I didn't knock. I didn't want to see her face twist into that brittle mask she wore whenever she was cornered. This wasn't about confrontation, not anymore. It wasn't about yelling or tears or even asking why. It was about certainty. Quiet, deliberate certainty. I bent down, slid the envelope under the door, and watched it disappear into the space between us. That was enough. She would know I had stopped playing defense. She would know the truth wasn't going away just because she ignored it. Back home, the silence felt different. Less like an absence, more like a clearing. I sat at my desk, the folder open in front of me, and took stock not just of the documents stacked neatly in protective sleeves, but of what they represented. Evidence, yes. But more than that, resolve. For months, I had been clinging to the idea that if I could just show them, if I could just prove it, then maybe they would relent. Maybe they would admit what they'd done. But that hunger was gone now. I no longer cared about convincing them. I no longer needed the world to like me or even believe me. All I needed was the record corrected. 3 weeks later, I walked into the courthouse. I wore the same black blazer I had worn to every one of my father's doctor visits. The fabric softened by years of sitting in waiting rooms, by hours spent in chairs too hard for bodies too tired. Not for luck, no luck had never favored me in this family, but for remembrance. To remind myself exactly who I was walking in for. The morning was hushed damp. Rain had fallen the night before, washing the city clean, but leaving everything tired in its wake. Wet sidewalks reflected the pale sky. The courthouse windows were streaked with water. their frames catching the light in muted glimmers. The air smelled faintly of pavement and humidity, a heaviness that clung to every step. Inside the courthouse was only half full. A few attorneys sat scattered about their suits, pressed sharp, their eyes buried in phones. An elderly couple waited for a probate review, hands folded together on a shared stack of papers. A young man stood near the wall, gripping a file folder against his chest as though afraid it might take flight. Evelyn was waiting for me just beyond the security line. She didn't speak much, she didn't have to. We'd combed through every document together the night before, every clause and comma of the exhibit packet memorized, rehearsed, ready. The will, the signature comparisons, the funeral program that erased me like a name rubbed out of stone. The letter my father had written, shaky, but still his, steady enough to stand. The email he'd sent to the notary firm a year before his death, simple and undeniable. Please prepare a final will update. I want everything in my daughter Muriel's name. No ambiguity, no room for revision, just the truth in his words. Octavia was already there, seated at the front beside her attorney, a man named Grant Booker. He had the slick, practiced demeanor of someone who could smile while delivering an eviction notice, the kind of lawyer who licked his fingers after eating someone else's inheritance. His tie was perfect. His shoes gleamed. His confidence radiated like cheap cologne. Maureen Mean slipped in 10 minutes late, oversized sunglasses perched on her face despite the fluorescent lighting, as if she could hide from recognition while practically begging to be noticed. She moved with the restless energy of someone who thrived on spectacle. Gordon wasn't there at all, which didn't surprise me. He had always been present when there were photos to be taken, absent when anything real was required. I didn't look at them. Not once. My eyes stayed fixed on the judge, on the steady wooden gavel resting on the bench. The proceedings began slowly, as all court matters do. Formalities, introductions, the measured pace of procedure. The reading of documents, the asking of basic questions. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Just the weight of truth entering the record piece by piece. Evelyn's voice was calm, unwavering. She didn't raise it, didn't embellish, didn't turn the story into performance. She simply placed each fact into the open, like laying bricks one after another until a foundation formed. She wasn't telling a story. She was correcting one. And as I sat there listening, I realized that was all I had ever wanted. Not vengeance, not even recognition, just correction. Grant cleared his throat, that polished courtroom voice smoothing over every word as if tone could disguise intent. He painted a picture of my father in his last year as a man unraveling, cognitively inconsistent, he said, as though the phrase itself carried authority. He called it a period of confusion and ambiguous intent, suggesting my father's choices were nothing more than the ramblings of a fading mind. But then, Evelyn leaned forward. Calm, precise. She slid a thin folder across the table and handed it directly to the judge. Inside was the email thread between my father and the notary's office. Not speculation, not memory. Hard proof. Dates, times, attachments, each one stamped and clear. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipped through a few pages, and paused. When he finally looked up, his voice was steady and sharp enough to cut the air. What you're arguing, he said, eyes fixed on Grant, isn't lack of clarity. It's lack of truth. The sentence landed like a gavel before the gavel. Octavia flinched. For the first time since I'd walked into that courtroom, her posture cracked. She sagged slightly, as though some invisible string holding her spine upright had snapped. Slow, subtle, but irreversible. Mean shifted in her seat, tugged her sunglasses higher, and crossed her arms. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked like someone trapped in a storm who refused to admit she had left all the windows open. My heart was pounding fast and relentless, but my face stayed still. Neutral. They would get nothing from me. Not a smirk, not a shake. Not even the satisfaction of seeing me breathe heavier. After the final presentations and cross-statements, the judge recessed. Just under an hour. Evelyn and I stepped outside, finding a stone bench near the courthouse steps. The city hummed around us, traffic lights, clicking footsteps echoing the faint smell of rain still hanging in the air. We sipped from the same lukewarm coffee we'd picked up earlier, neither of us pretending it tasted good. Words weren't necessary. We were past anger, past grief. This wasn't emotion anymore. This was execution. When the court resumed, everyone rose. The judge re-entered robes, trailing expression unreadable. He didn't waste time. The 2018 will of Charlton Dawson is hereby recognized as the legally binding directive of the estate he announced voice measured but final. All subsequent documentation is deemed invalid. The estate in its entirety is to be restored to the named beneficiary Morel Dawson. Silence. No shuffling. No gasps. Just the faint scribble of a pen from the court clerk recording the words that rewrote everything. Then the judge added his gaze, shifting deliberately from Octavia to Mean. Furthermore, this court finds credible evidence of deliberate misrepresentation intended to obscure legal succession and family standing. We will proceed to financial review under separate filing. That was it. Final. Unshakable. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply stood. Morin left, first clutching her purse so tightly it looked like it might burst open from the pressure. She didn't glance my way. Octavia followed more slowly, her lawyer leaning close, whispering something meant to soothe or spin. She didn't answer. Her face was pale, her steps small, like she was walking out of her own reflection. I gathered my things methodically, one paper at a time, sliding them back into my leather folder. Each movement deliberate. Then I walked out, heels echoing against the marble floor. The courthouse doors opened, and the weight of humid air washed over me. Waiting on the steps was Sandra Notepad in one hand, recorder in the other. Her eyes met mine, sharp but not unkind. "Moral," she said, voice steady. "Would you like to comment?" I paused, letting the question settle. Then I met her gaze. "It wasn't about revenge," I said quietly. "It was about memory." She nodded, pen scratching across paper. "May I quote you?" I tilted my head, a small breath leaving my chest. "You already did." I stepped past Sandra, past the curious eyes on the courthouse steps and into the street. The clouds had finally broken, and sunlight spread across the stone like a soft benediction. It wasn't blinding or triumphant, just steady, almost tender. My feet felt heavier than they had in weeks, not from defeat. Not even from exhaustion, but from something grounding, something final. A weight that settled, not pressed. I had won. But strangely, that wasn't the part that mattered. 2 days after the ruling, I stood alone on the front porch of my father's house. The house he had built with his own hands, board by board, after coming back from service. The house that carried the rhythm of his hammer, the sweat in the grain of the wood, the memory of him standing tall against the frame before the roof was even raised. The key felt strange in my hand. Not heavy, just unfamiliar. Like an heirloom passed down too late, its edges worn by other fingers before mine. It belonged to me now. Legally. Publicly. But inside I wasn't sure it ever could. When I pushed the door open, the air that rushed out was the same as it had always been. Cedar old paper lemon polish. Time hadn't altered it. The scent was intact, like a capsule of a life that once filled every room. Only now the silence made it echo, not with sound, but with memory. Most of the furniture was draped in white sheets, untouched. Octavia and Morin had claimed the deed, yes, but not the life. They hadn't lived here long enough to mark it. They had tried to own it, but they never belonged to it. That difference mattered more than I expected. I walked slowly, room by room. I didn't climb the stairs. I didn't open drawers. I wasn't searching for lost keepsakes or hidden letters. I was just moving through the spaces he left behind, saying goodbye in my own way. In the living room, I stopped. On the coffee table, I placed 2 items side by side, a framed copy of the court's decision and the letter my father had written me. I slid both into a small wooden box I'd found in the closet. Nothing ornate, just solid, honest. Like him. An hour later, when the city official arrived, we walked the perimeter together. He was professional but kind, careful not to intrude on what the house meant. I told him I wanted it designated as a preservation space. Not a museum, not a tourist marker. Something quiet, I said. For caregivers, for veterans, for people who carry weight no one else can see. He nodded. Plaques. I shook my head. No names, just space to breathe. We signed the papers on the porch. I handed him the keys, the metal warm from my palm, and then I walked down the steps without turning back. 3 days later, Evelyn and I met for coffee at our usual corner shop. No polished tables, no fancy syrups. Just strong coffee-chipped mugs and regulars who minded their own business. She'd already claimed the booth by the window. When I slid in, she pushed a cup toward me without asking how I took it. "They haven't filed an appeal," she said. "They won't," I replied. She stirred her tea, the spoon clinking softly against porcelain. We didn't speak of Octavia or Morin or the mess they'd left behind. We didn't need to. They had lost more than a case, they had lost the narrative they tried to steal. Evelyn studied me for a moment, then raised her cup. "To what's earned," she said softly, and to what's walked away from I answered. We didn't clink cups. We just drank. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't closure in the storybook sense. It was steadiness, like standing on ground that finally stopped shifting beneath your feet. That evening, I returned to my new apartment in Atlanta. A modest second-floor walk-up with creaky stairs, wide windows, and just enough space for one person to move without colliding with the past. The walls were bare. The shelves half-filled a thrift store couch in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was mine. On the far wall hung one thing that didn't blend in the letter. Still sealed. Still untouched. I had read it once long ago, but I'd never opened it again. I didn't need to. Its meaning wasn't in the ink. It was in the act of its existence. My father had written it for me, not for courts, not for Octavia, not for Morin, not even for Evelyn. For me. That was enough. I sat on the couch, a blanket across my knees, and watched the dusk settle across the skyline. The city hummed beyond the glass, but inside it was quiet. Not the emptiness of loss, the fullness of peace. And in that quiet, I heard him. Not his voice exactly, but the certainty he had given me. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it comes as a whisper you don't need to repeat. Sometimes it's the strength to stop proving who you are. Sometimes it's the choice not to chase applause, but to rest in the truth that already belongs to you. I hadn't needed to win. I just needed to be seen. And I was. I just needed to know I could walk away without carrying their version of me. That at last was enough. Before I leave you, I want to share something. If you've followed me through every turn of this story, you already know this was never about a house or a will, or even the money. Those were only the stage props. What was at stake was something harder to name. Something that slips under politeness, gets buried beneath silence. Something generations of us are taught to swallow with the words, "Don't make trouble." It was about erasure. About what it means when your existence is edited out of the story you lived, and about the choice to no longer stay gone. Here's what I've learned. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes the people who share your name won't share your truth. And when that moment comes, when the rewriting begins, you face a decision, fade quietly into the background, or draw a line that says, "This is where I stand." I didn't fight to prove them wrong. That was never the goal. I fought to remember who I was before they tried to rewrite me into nothing. And if you're watching this, if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or quietly pushed out of your own life, I want you to hear me clearly. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to protect your truth, even if you're the only one who knows it's real. Especially then. So let me ask you, have you ever had to walk away from people you still love just so you could keep hold of yourself? If you have, I'd like to hear. Tell me below. Share your story. Because when one of us speaks, the silence cracks for all of us. And if this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments. Or tell me which part hit closest to home. I'd love to know where you're listening from and how this story sat with you. And if it didn't resonate, say that too. Tell me what felt off, or what you would have done differently. We're not here to polish perfection. We're here to practice honesty. And if you're someone who believes stories like this still matter, I'd ask you to stay. Subscribe to this channel because there are more stories to tell. Some might sound a little like mine. Some might sound a little like yours. Either way, thank you for being here, for listening, for reminding me that silence isn't the only inheritance we get to keep.